The cold was a thief. It stole the feeling from Sarah Mitchell's fingers, the warmth from her breath, and soon it would steal the last whimpers from her infant daughter. The broken-down carriage was a coffin on wheels, and the howling Wyoming wind was its funeral dirge. Darkness was falling, and with it, any shred of hope she had left. Her fingers, stiff and useless, fumbled for the pearl-handled compass in her coat. It was Thomas's last gift, her husband. Dead just 8 days, gone during the same difficult birth that brought little Emma into the world. Now it felt like he had taken all the warmth with him, leaving her to freeze in this God-forsaken wilderness. "Please," she whispered, her words turning to ice in the air. "Help us." Emma's cries were weaker now, a tiny fading sound against the roar of the storm. Each one was a fresh knife in Sarah's heart. She'd made the decision to travel to her sister in Montana, thinking it was her only option. A fool's errand. The carriage driver, a man named Peters, had set off for help hours ago, a ghost disappearing into a world of white. She'd begged him not to go, but the horses had broken free, swallowed by the blizzard, and they were out of choices. She clutched Thomas's worn leather medical bag. He'd been a doctor, a man who saved lives. And here she was, his wife, unable to save their own child. The irony was as bitter as the wind. Emma's cries grew insistent, a desperate plea for food and warmth. With trembling hands, Sarah unbuttoned her coat, her dress, anything to share the last dregs of her own body heat. As Emma nursed, Sarah hummed a lullaby, her voice shaking. That's when she heard it. Through the howl of the wind, another sound. Hoofbeats. Was she losing her mind, hallucinating hope in the face of death? She held her breath, straining to listen. There it was again, closer, definitely closer. Sarah clutched Emma and shoved the carriage door open. The wind and snow hit her like a physical blow. A shape materialized from the storm, dark and massive. A horse, steam pouring from its nostrils like a dragon, and on its back, a rider. The figure pulled his horse to a stop. A deep voice cut through the wind. "Ma'am, you all right in there?" Relief hit her so hard she nearly fainted. "Please," she croaked, her voice cracking. "My baby. We need help." The rider dismounted in a single fluid motion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face mostly hidden by a snow-caked scarf. But his eyes, when they met hers, were sharp and filled with a calm concern that felt almost unnerving. "Jackson Cole," he said, his voice a low rumble. He was already shrugging off his heavy coat. "My ranch is about 2 miles from here. We need to get you out of this cold, now." He wrapped the impossibly warm coat around her shoulders. She could only stammer her name. "Sarah Mitchell. This is Emma." "Your driver went for help," she added, the words tumbling out. "Mr. Peters." "I'll send my men to look for him," Jackson said, his gaze taking in everything at once. He didn't seem surprised or panicked. He seemed prepared. "Can you ride?" Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure her legs would hold her. As Jackson helped her from the carriage, his grip was like iron. He supported her easily, his strength absolute. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said, and something in his steady voice sent a strange chill down her spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'll make sure you both get there safely. Trust me." The ride was a blur of biting wind and the steady, powerful movement of the horse beneath them. Sarah sat in front of Jackson, his arms a cage around her, holding the reins. Emma was bundled between them, finally quiet, lulled into an exhausted sleep. The warmth from Jackson's body was immense, almost smothering. "Stay with me, Mrs. Mitchell," his voice rumbled, too close to her ear. She realized she'd been drifting off. She forced her eyes open, trying to focus on anything. Her gaze landed on a hand-carved wooden horse head on his saddle horn. The detail was exquisite, almost obsessive. "The horse," she murmured, her words slurring. "Did you make it?" "I did," he replied. "Keeps my hands busy during the storms." There was an odd pause. Never expected anyone to notice it, though. Sarah's head felt heavy. She fought the urge to lean back against his solid chest. There was something about his stillness, his control, that was unsettling. "Keep talking to me," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. "Tell me about your husband." "He was a doctor," she mumbled, the memories raw and bleeding. His heart just gave out after Emma was born." Jackson was silent for a long moment, the only sound the crunching of snow. "I'm sorry," he said finally. And the way he said it, it sounded less like sympathy and more like a statement of fact. "Loss changes everything." "You speak from experience," Sarah managed to say, the cold making her teeth chatter. "My wife, Catherine," he said, his voice flat. 5 years ago, mountain fever. The ranch was her dream." He didn't sound sad. He sounded empty, as if he were reciting a line from a play. Suddenly, a light appeared through the swirling snow. "Look there," he said. "That's home." The ranch house was substantial, a fortress against the storm. As they got closer, she saw a large barn and other outbuildings, all neat and orderly, impossibly so in the middle of a blizzard. He guided the horse straight to the barn. "Need to care for Stone here," he said, dismounting. He reached up for her, and his hands were strong, inescapable. Her legs gave out the moment her feet touched the ground, and he caught her without effort. The barn was warm and smelled of hay and leather. He unsaddled the horse with an efficient, practiced grace. Sarah leaned against a post, watching him. He moved like a man who was never surprised, who was always in complete control of his surroundings. "Ready for the house?" he asked, turning back to her. She tried to take a step and stumbled again. Without a word, he scooped her into his arms, carrying both her and Emma as if they weighed nothing. "No arguments," he said, his voice leaving no room for them. "You're half frozen." The short walk to the house was a dizzying trip through the roaring wind. The last thing she saw before exhaustion finally claimed her was a fire blazing in a massive stone hearth. She was safe. She had to be. But as she sank into blackness, a single terrifying thought echoed in her mind. What if she had just traded one frozen prison for another? Sarah woke up to the crackle of a fire and the smell of stew. She was on a comfortable settee, wrapped in heavy quilts. The room was large, masculine, filled with dark wood and leather. But then she noticed the other touches: hand-embroidered cushions, dried flowers in a vase, a delicate tea service on a side table. It was a room a woman had made a home. And for a moment, panic seized her. Emma wasn't in her arms. "Your little one's right here." Jackson's voice came from a large armchair near the fire. He was holding Emma, cradling her with an expert gentleness that seemed completely at odds with his rugged appearance. He was stirring a pot over the fire with his free hand, his movements calm and measured. The sight was so bizarre, so domestic, it was jarring. "I hope you don't mind," he said, not looking at her, his eyes fixed on the baby. "You were nearly unconscious. She was starting to fuss." He looked up then, and his eyes were impossible to read. "My sister leaves things here for her children. I found clean linens, a proper swaddling blanket." Sarah pushed herself up, every muscle aching. "You seem to know what you're doing." A shadow, brief and dark, crossed his face. "Catherine and we were never blessed with our own, but my sister's children visit." He turned his attention back to the pot. "Soup's ready. You need to eat." Sarah looked around the room again. It was beautiful, but it was also perfect. Too perfect. Nothing was out of place. It was less like a home and more like a museum, a shrine. "Your wife had beautiful taste," Sarah said softly. His hand stilled for a fraction of a second. "She made everything she touched more beautiful." He gazed down at Emma, and his expression was strange. It wasn't love or even fondness. It was assessment, like he was examining a new acquisition. "Babies are honest creatures," he said, his voice a low murmur. "They know when they're safe." He rose and brought Emma to her. The baby was clean, warm, and smelled faintly of lavender soap. "She's been changed and fed. Found some goat's milk." Sarah took her daughter, holding her close. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. "Thank you seems inadequate," she said. Jackson just nodded, moving back to the fire to ladle out a bowl of soup. "No thanks needed. Couldn't leave you out there." He brought her the soup, a chunk of bread on the side. "Eat," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. The storm still howled outside, but in here it was silent. Too silent. Jackson sat back in his chair, watching the fire. Not her, just the fire. "My men will go out at first light," he said after a while. "They'll look for your driver and retrieve your things." "Mr. Peters, do you think he's all right?" He turned his head then and looked directly at her. "He's a local man, knows these parts. He'll be fine." But there was no reassurance in his voice. It was a dismissal. As Sarah ate the delicious soup, a creeping dread began to settle in her stomach. Every comfort, every kindness, felt wrong, calculated. This wasn't a rescue, it was a transaction. And she had no idea what she was expected to pay. As she drifted off to sleep again on the settee, she was aware of him draping another quilt over her. His movements were silent, like a predator's. For the first time since Thomas's death, she didn't feel protected. She felt watched. Dawn broke, and the world outside was a silent canvas of white. The storm had passed. Sarah woke to find Jackson sitting at the kitchen table, a leather-bound journal open in front of him. Emma was in a makeshift cradle nearby, sleeping soundly. He'd already fed and changed her. Again. "She was fussing," he said, looking up as if he'd sensed her waking. "You needed the sleep." His efficiency was unnerving. He gestured to the coffee pot on the stove. "Help yourself, Sarah." The use of her first name felt too familiar, too fast. She poured a cup, her hands shaking slightly. The kitchen was as immaculate as the main room. Copper pots hung in a perfect row. Dried herbs were bundled with military precision. "My men found Mr. Peters," Jackson said, his tone flat. Sarah's heart leaped. "Is he all right?" "He made it to the Watson place, north of here. He's fine." He didn't look at her when he said it. He just kept his eyes on his journal. "They've also retrieved your belongings from the carriage. They're in the front room." He pushed the journal slightly towards her. "Just reviewing the spring planting schedule. The storm set us back." Sarah glanced at the neat columns of figures. It was Catherine's handwriting, not his. "Catherine used to help with the books," he said, as if reading her mind. "She had a way with numbers." He said it without emotion, a simple statement of fact. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The entire ranch, this house, it wasn't just a memory of his wife. It was being maintained as if she had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. "You must miss her," Sarah said, testing the waters. He finally met her eyes. "Every day, just as you miss Thomas." It wasn't a question. It was a declaration, an assumption of shared grief that felt like a cage closing around her. Emma gurgled in her sleep, and Jackson's face softened for the first time. It was a shocking transformation. "She has good timing," he said, his voice almost warm. He stood. "I need to check on the hands. Will you be all right here? It was a rhetorical question. Where would she go? I wish I could repay your kindness, she said, the words feeling like ash in her mouth. He paused at the door, pulling on his coat. No repayment needed. He looked back at her, his face unreadable again. But Catherine's kitchen garden will need attention this spring. She wouldn't want to see it go to wild. It wasn't an invitation, it was an assignment. Sarah found herself nodding. After he left, she went to the front room. Her trunks were there, neatly stacked, and beside them, Thomas's medical bag. She opened it, her fingers tracing the familiar tools. But then she saw it. Something was wrong. The bag had been opened. A small, locked compartment where Thomas kept his private papers and laudanum had been forced. It was empty. A cold dread washed over her. Why would Jackson, or his men, go through her dead husband's medical bag? What could they possibly be looking for? She walked back to the kitchen, her mind racing. The journal was still on the table. Catherine's journal. His story about his own handwriting being poor was a lie. This was Catherine's daily record. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. The entries were filled with notes on planting, household accounts, the weather. Normal things. She flipped through the pages, going further and further back. Then she stopped. An entry from 5 years ago in the fall, just before Jackson said she had died. The handwriting was different. It was shaky, frantic. He watches me, Catherine had written. He says it's because he loves me. But this isn't love. It's a cage. The storms are coming. I have to get out before the snow traps me here for another winter. I have to try. Sarah slammed the journal shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. Mountain fever. He had lied. Catherine hadn't died of a fever. She had tried to escape, and she had failed. The days that followed were a waking nightmare disguised as an idyllic life. Jackson was a patient teacher, showing her the rhythms of the ranch. But his lessons felt like tests. His praise felt like an appraisal. He was always there, always watching. He taught her how to mend fences, how to read the weather, how to handle the books, Catherine's books. Every task was a step deeper into the life of the woman who had tried to flee this place. He taught her how to ride, just as he said he would. But it wasn't liberating. It was another form of control. He chose the horse, a gentle old mare named Belle. He was always with her, his hand on the reins, his voice a constant, low murmur in her ear. "You're a natural, Sarah. You belong here." The words were meant to be a compliment, but they sounded like a sentence. One afternoon, as they were checking on a herd of cattle, the sky began to darken. "Storm's coming," Jackson said, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was never worried. He was always prepared. "We should get the herd closer to the barn." "I can help," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. He looked at her, a long, calculating gaze. "Not this time," he said, his tone final. "I won't risk you. Or Emma." His protectiveness was a smothering blanket. He was keeping her safe, but he was also keeping her contained. She was a prize, a replacement part for the life he'd so carefully constructed. And Emma was the key. With the baby, Sarah was anchored here. She couldn't run, not with a child in tow. Later that week, she was organizing his study, a task he'd assigned her. In the back of a drawer, she found it, a faded photograph of Catherine. She was beautiful, with laughing eyes and a rebellious smile. She was standing next to a young oak tree. And Sarah knew, with a sickening certainty, that it was the same massive oak that stood outside the kitchen window. "That was her first spring here," Jackson said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved through the house like a ghost. "She planted that tree, said our home needed something that would grow with us." He took the photograph from her hand, his thumb brushing over Catherine's face. She had a way of seeing the future, said that tree would shade our children's children. His voice was hollow, not with grief, but with something else, a cold, chilling anger. He put the photo back in the drawer and closed it with a soft, final click. Some days, he said, his eyes locking onto hers, I wonder if I'm betraying her memory. Emma cried from the other room, and the moment was broken. I'll get her, Jackson said, moving with that unnerving speed. Left alone, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Betraying her memory, or replacing her. The thought was so terrifying she felt bile rise in her throat. He wasn't mourning Catherine. He was preserving her. And he had found the perfect new specimen to place in his collection. That night, Emma developed a fever. It came on suddenly, her small body hot to the touch, her cries weak and pained. Sarah's panic was instant and overwhelming. Her temperature's rising, Jackson said, his voice a mask of calm. He was already in motion, his competence a terrifying thing to witness. I've seen this before in my sister's children. We need to watch her through the night. He didn't ask for her opinion. He took charge completely. I sent one of the hands to town for medicine, he said, holding Emma with that practiced ease. But it won't arrive before morning. We'll use my mother's remedies. For hours they worked together in a tense, silent ballet. They bathed Emma in lukewarm water, applied cool cloths to her forehead. Jackson was tireless, efficient. He never lost his composure. But as the night wore on, Sarah noticed something. He wasn't just tending to a sick baby. He was watching Sarah, gauging her reactions, seeing how she held up under pressure. This wasn't a crisis. It was another test. You should rest, he said as the moon rose high in the sky. I'll take the first watch. Sarah wanted to refuse, to stay by her daughter's side, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion was setting in. She curled up in a chair near the cradle, her eyes never leaving him as he paced the room, humming a low, tuneless lullaby. This felt like family. The thought ambushed her, a horrifying parody of the life she'd lost. She was trapped in a flawless imitation of a home, with a man who was a flawless imitation of a husband and father. She woke to his hand on her shoulder. Her fever broke, he whispered in the pale morning light. Relief washed over her, so potent it was nauseating. She rushed to the cradle. Emma was sleeping peacefully, her skin cool. Without thinking, she turned and hugged him. It was a mistake. His arms came around her, slow and deliberate. He held her for a long moment, and it wasn't a hug of shared comfort. It was a hug of possession. Thank you, she whispered, pulling away, her skin crawling. I should check on the men, he said, his expression unreadable. But as he turned to leave, she saw it. A flicker of triumph in his eyes. She had passed his test. He had seen her fear, her desperation, and her gratitude. He had seen her depend on him. And he was satisfied. That afternoon, another storm rolled in. Not as bad as the first one, but the wind howled, and the sky turned a bruised purple. As they secured the shutters, Sarah's eyes fell on the broken wagon wheel from her carriage, which now leaned against the barn like a trophy. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Jackson said, his voice low as he barred the door. Though the circumstances are somewhat different now. Later, as they sat by the fire, he began to whittle a piece of wood. It was a tiny horse, a companion to the one on his saddle. For Emma, he said, not looking at her. For when she's older. The implication was clear. They would all be here, together, for years to come. Sarah, he began, setting his carving aside. His voice was soft, but it held a core of steel. I know you were planning to go to your sister's. A loud crack of thunder shook the house, or at least she thought it was thunder. Then came the sound of splintering wood. Jackson was on his feet in an instant. The old oak, he said, his voice grim. It split. If it falls wrong, It could take out the barn. He was already grabbing his coat. Sarah's mind raced. The oak. Catherine's oak. It felt like an omen, a ghost from the past crying out a warning. She had to know. "I'm coming with you," she said, her voice firm. He hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close." Outside, the wind and rain were a frenzy. The massive tree had indeed split, one huge limb hanging precariously over the barn roof. As Jackson worked with ropes to secure it, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene. And that's when Sarah saw it. At the base of the oak tree, where the earth had been disturbed by the splintering roots, something was sticking out of the mud. It was a small leather-bound book, Catherine's diary. Not the curated household ledger in the kitchen, but her real private thoughts. Jackson's back was to her. He was focused on the tree. Her heart pounding, Sarah scrambled through the mud and snatched the book. It was soaked but intact. She shoved it into her dress, her hands shaking so badly she could barely function. This was it. This was the truth. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that whatever was written in those pages would either set her free or sign her death warrant. She waited until he was asleep. It was the deepest part of the night, the storm having finally worn itself out. The house was silent except for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a countdown to the moment he would wake. With trembling fingers, she pulled Catherine's real diary from its hiding place. The pages were stiff and warped from the rain, the ink blurred in places, but it was legible. She lit a single candle, shielding its light, and began to read. The first entries were filled with hope. A young bride, in love with a handsome rancher and the wild, beautiful land he called home. But the tone quickly soured. The love she described became obsession. Jackson's care became control. He isolated her from her family, dismissed her opinions, slowly, methodically, erasing her until all that was left was his idea of a perfect wife. Then came the entries about the first winter. "The snow is a prison wall," Catherine wrote. "He loves the storms. They keep me here. They keep me his." Sarah's blood ran cold. It was happening all over again. The diary detailed Catherine's secret plans to escape. She had been saving money, hiding supplies. She planned to leave during the first thaw of spring, 5 years ago. But Jackson found out. The last entry was almost unreadable, the handwriting a frantic scrawl. "He knows. God help me. He knows. He said no one ever leaves him. He made me a cup of his special tea tonight, the one he makes from the wild monkshood that grows by the creek. To calm my nerves," he said. "But my nerves are not calm. My heart is pounding strangely, and my hands are numb. He is watching me write this. He is smiling." Monkshood. Sarah dropped the diary as if it had burned her. She stumbled to the front room, to Thomas's medical bag. She fumbled it open, her mind a maelstrom of horror. Tucked away in a hidden pocket she'd never known about was a small, leather-bound notebook, her husband's private journal. His handwriting was precise, clinical. He was investigating a series of strange deaths in the territory. Women, mostly. Wives of wealthy, isolated men. All had died of natural causes. Mountain fever, heart failure, accidents. His last entries were about a reclusive rancher named Jackson Cole, whose young wife, Catherine, had died under mysterious circumstances 5 years prior. Thomas had suspicions. He'd heard rumors from the local Arapaho about the plants that grew on Cole's land. Poisonous plants. He was traveling to the area to investigate, under the guise of simply passing through. The final entry was dated the day before he died. "I will be passing near the Cole ranch tomorrow. I've arranged to have my carriage break down nearby. A winter storm is predicted. It will be the perfect opportunity to see the man for myself. I have a terrible feeling about this place." The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't an accident. None of it. Jackson hadn't stumbled upon them. He had orchestrated everything. He had sabotaged the carriage. He had lured them there. He had murdered her husband. Thomas hadn't died of exhaustion from Emma's birth. Jackson had somehow gotten to him, used his knowledge of herbs and poisons, and made it look like a heart attack. A doctor, dying of a heart attack while treating his wife and newborn. Who would question it? Jackson had wanted a new wife, a new mother for the child he could never have. He'd seen Sarah, a vulnerable widow with a newborn baby, and he had set his trap. He wasn't just a monster, he was a collector. And she was his latest acquisition. A floorboard creaked upstairs. He was awake. Sarah shoved the journals into her dress, her heart a wild animal trapped in her chest. The front door was barred. The windows were shuttered. The storm had passed, but she had never been more trapped in her life. She looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her cradle. She had to get her out. She had to get them both out. But how do you escape from a man who plans for everything? Her only chance was to play his game, to be the perfect wife he was trying to create. The next morning, she was cheerful, grateful. She praised his bravery in saving the old oak tree. She talked about plans for the garden. She smiled until her face ached. He watched her, his eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of a crack in her facade. But she gave him nothing. She was Catherine, version 2. Docile, content, and completely his. She needed a weapon. She needed a way out. The answer, she realized, was in the very things he had taught her. He had taught her about the ranch, about its routines, its hidden paths. He had taught her about the horses. And most importantly, Thomas had left her his knowledge. In his journal, he had detailed the properties of various plants, including monkshood. He described its effects, but also its antidote, atropine, which could be found in the belladonna that grew in the shaded parts of the woods. Jackson thought he had taken the laudanum, but he hadn't known about the hidden compartment with the atropine vials. For the next week, she planned. She secreted food away. She mended her warmest clothes. During her rides on Old Bell, she steered the horse towards the woods, familiarizing herself with the escape route Thomas had unknowingly mapped out in his notes. She found the belladonna. She found everything she needed. She just had to wait for the right moment. The moment came with the first snow of the following week. It wasn't a blizzard, just a steady, heavy fall that would cover her tracks. That evening she made a special dinner, a rich beef stew, just like the first one he had made for her. "To thank you," she said, her voice sweet and steady, "for everything. For saving us." She served him his bowl first. As she turned back to the stove, she uncorked the tiny vial of laudanum she had managed to hide. It wasn't enough to kill him, but it would be enough to slow him down, to make him sleep. A deep, heavy sleep. She poured it into his wine. He drank it down, smiling at her over the rim of the glass. "To our future, Sarah," he said, "to our family." She watched him eat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She watched as his movements became sluggish, his words began to slur. He looked at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, and then he slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a dull thud. He was out. She didn't waste a second. She grabbed Emma from her cradle, wrapping her in every blanket she could find. She grabbed the satchel of food, Thomas's and Catherine's journals, and ran for the door. The bar was heavy, but adrenaline gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She slid it open and ran into the cold, snowy night. The barn was her sanctuary. Old Bell nickered softly as she approached. "It's okay, girl," Sarah whispered, her hands working frantically at the saddle. "You're going to take us away from here. You're going to take us to safety." She mounted the horse, settling Emma securely in front of her. She took one last look at the house, a perfect, beautiful prison silhouetted against the falling snow. Then she spurred Belle into a gallop, disappearing into the woods, into the darkness. She rode all night, guided by Thomas's compass and a desperate burning will to survive. She didn't know if Jackson would wake. She didn't know if he would come after them. All she knew was that she had to keep going. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gray, she saw it, the distant lights of a town. She urged Belle on, the horse exhausted, but steady. They had made it. She rode straight to the sheriff's office, kicking open the door. She stood there, covered in snow, holding her sleeping child, her eyes wild with terror and triumph. "My name is Sarah Cole," she said, her voice hoarse but strong. "And I've just escaped from a murderer." When the sheriff and his deputies rode out to the ranch, they found Jackson just waking up, groggy and disoriented. He tried to play the part of the concerned husband, frantic about his missing wife and child. But his story fell apart when they found Catherine's real diary, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Sarah's room. Then they found Thomas's journal. It was all there: the motive, the means, the confession of one victim, and the investigation of another. They found the stores of monkshood in the spring house. They found the empty compartment in Thomas's medical bag. Faced with the undeniable evidence, the mask of the charming, grieving widower shattered, revealing the cold, calculating monster beneath. The trial was the talk of the territory. The story of the brave widow who outsmarted her captor, using his own knowledge against him, became a legend. Jackson Cole was found guilty of the murders of his wife, Catherine, and of Dr. Thomas Mitchell. He was hanged before the first winter snows melted. Sarah didn't stay for the aftermath. She had found what she needed: justice. She returned to the ranch. For a while, she thought of selling it, of taking Emma and moving to Montana as she had originally planned. But as she walked the land, she saw it not as a prison, but as a place of survival. Her survival. Catherine's memory was no longer a ghostly presence. It was an inspiration. A woman who had fought back. Thomas was no longer just a painful memory. He was a hero who had given his life to uncover the truth. With the help of Jackson's former hands, who had been loyal to the ranch, not the man, Sarah began to rebuild. She took over the books, her own handwriting filling the ledgers. She tended Catherine's garden, planting new life where there had once been despair. She ran the ranch not as a shrine to a dead past, but as a testament to a future she had claimed for herself. Years passed. Emma grew up strong and fearless, a true daughter of the Wyoming wilderness. She knew the story of how they came to this place, not as a nightmare, but as a story of a mother's fierce love and a father's quiet courage. The old oak tree, scarred but not broken, thrived. It grew tall and strong, its branches reaching for the sky, shading a new generation. Sarah never remarried. She had found a different kind of love, a love for the land, for her daughter, and for the strength she had discovered within herself. She had faced the worst kind of storm and had not only survived, but had emerged into the sunlight, free and whole. The story of the Cole Ranch changed. It was no longer a place of dark secrets, but a symbol of hope. A place where a woman, left with nothing, had built everything. Sometimes the harshest storms don't break you. They reveal the unbreakable person you were meant to be. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the story we have for you tomorrow. It's a real-life mystery that will have you questioning everything you think you know about the people next door.